Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the Parish of St Brelade's election 2022 hustings. My name is Christopher Schofield. I'm a Jersey advocate, but far more important than that, as a resident of the parish of the Holy and Undivided Trinity, I'm completely impartial in this matter, so I'm your chairman for this evening. I have a number of important things to run through with you, but the less you hear from me and the more you hear from the candidates, the better, so I'll be as quick as I possibly can. First of all, a punishment too hideous to describe awaits he, she or they who should allow their mobile device to make an audible noise during the course of this evening, so please ensure that it's switched off. Secondly, this event will last for 2 hours, so at 9 p.m. I shall bring proceedings to a close. There is no format for these hustings prescribed by the Gref of the States, so instead we've used common sense and applied the following rules. This evening there will be speeches followed by questions. Each of the candidates will speak for 3 minutes, and at 2 minutes 50 seconds they will hear a bell reminding them that they need to wrap up quickly. After you have heard a speech of that length from each of the 9 candidates, then there will be time for questions, quite a bit of time. And there will be some rules applicable to questions too, but they're not difficult to follow. The candidates will each have 1 minute to answer the question. They won't be warned that they're running out of time. As we get to a minute, they will hear the bell, and I will expect them to sit down. Just to be perfectly clear, the parish of St Brelade is fortunate in that it is one large constituency. You have 9 candidates standing for 4 seats. The candidates have all drawn lots this evening, starting at the far right, and that is the order in which they will give their personal speeches. When they come to answer your questions, candidate number 2 will answer the first question all the way down the line back to candidate number 1. And for the second question, candidate number 3 will answer the question first, all the way down the line back to candidate number 2. And if by then I've still not got completely confused, that's the system we'll be following. We have Jo Alford manning the bell this evening, and I have asked her to be absolutely ruthless and to take no prisoners, because we must be fair and have people speak for the allotted time and no longer. When it comes to the questions, the rules are perfectly straightforward. What we're looking for is a good spread of questions from young and old, from male and female, and about parish questions and island questions. So we'll be doing our best to try and select questions on that basis, although of course I won't know until you put your question whether or not it's actually an island or a parish matter that you want to raise. There are 2 things that must not be allowed and will not be allowed. One is that a question cannot be addressed to just one candidate. It must be for all the candidates standing for election to answer. And the second point is that what we, I'm afraid, don't want to hear are speeches from the floor, followed by what do you think of that, as a sort of question tucked on as an excuse at the end. We want genuine questions rather than speeches. If it's speeches you want to make, you should be standing for election. That's enough from me, so we'll crack on now with the first of our candidates, who is going to give his 3-minute presentation. And I haven't introduced them to you because it's up to them to introduce themselves. Thank you.
I've been asked, first of all, is this working? I've been asked, first of all, to welcome you all here and to thank the chair. Well, I've been asked, first of all, to thank you all for coming and to thank the chair for volunteering to be so, and the school staff and everybody else who's helped to set this up this evening. So with that out of the way, thank you. I'm ready to start. I'm so very sorry to have missed last week's hustings at the parish hall. I heard all about it. I'd like to thank Deputy Montfort-Tannier for doing such a great job of speaking for both of us whenever he could at that event. I think that was a great example of the teamwork that we bring to the role as deputies for the parish. As a team from the same party, as good friends for a decade, and with a great Reform Jersey team behind us, we have capabilities that are more than a little unique. Working together, we will get more done. Monty and I were chatting about this online the other night. This is a time of great change, not only for the island, but globally. Old ways of thinking and of solving problems are showing up as increasingly outdated. We have a cost of living crisis, a housing crisis, a climate and biodiversity emergency. We have a war in Europe. We're still recovering from a global pandemic. We have people using food banks and removals companies that are snowed under by people wanting to leave the island. I would like to see a big conversation going on. People want to see our beautiful parish becoming the island's second town. Well, we don't want it to become anything like the existing town. We need a master plan developed by everybody with the right balance of shops and housing, of entertainment and workplaces, of services and open spaces, beautiful places for tourists and for us to play and relax. This consultation needs to start now and must involve all of us. I will be very happy to facilitate it. Dog-eat-dog individualism, woolly, timid ideas and greedy, selfish thinking have got us into a terrible mess. Strong teamwork, looking at the bigger picture and working together, will put us on a healthy, sustainable path. For too long now, this island has been governed for the benefit of millionaires and billionaires, for speculators, tax avoiders and property speculators. We're still waiting for some of that to trickle down to the rest of us, but I think we've been waiting far too long. It's never been more important time to vote, and to vote for change. We have a strong plan to tackle the housing crisis, to make the tax system much fairer for everyone, to make healthcare more affordable, to make room for our young people to want to live here, to look after our countryside and precious wild places, and to improve the transport system. We need to reawaken the community, the sense of community that we grew up in this parish. We need to give back hope to young people building their lives and put Jersey on the road to a more caring, fairer future. Thank you.
Good evening. I'm Helen Miles and I'm standing as an independent candidate for the parish. I've got strong links with St Brelade, going back to the 1970s when I was actually part of the first intake at Monicole Primary School. I returned in 2000 to raise my family, and we all remain a proud part of our parish community. I spent 30 years working for Jersey's public service, including for Customs and Immigration, the Probation Service and the police. I'm currently the Vice Chair of Autism Jersey and I hold several lecturing posts. And I've got a PhD in social sciences, specialising in Jersey's unique honorary police and parish hall inquiry system. We live in a great parish and a wonderful island, but in recent years we've lost focus on the issues that really matter to the public. We need to put Jersey back on track, and I believe I have the commitment, the leadership and the experience that's needed. If I'm elected, my priority for St Brelade is to establish a parish improvement project to ensure that we're making the best use of our local amenities, including Communicare, the Elephant Park and the Railway Walk. The Brelade Parade and Precinct in particular should be areas that we can be proud of, but instead they're looking tired and uncared for. I want this to be a colourful, energetic and lively part of our parish. I'd support the trial lease of an empty unit in the precinct to provide a hub for government services in the west of the island. It would be great for people out west to go through a real front door and talk to a real person about the real things that actually matter to them. And it would bring more business into the area. Island-wide, we must tackle the housing crisis if we're to give our young families hope of a secure future. Of course, I support the delivery of affordable housing on appropriate sites, prioritising first-time buyers and last-time buyers, and delivering options within the parish for downsizing to assist with the supply of family homes. We must protect the least well-off from cost of living increases, including, if necessary, through time-specific GST holidays. To manage our population and support businesses to recruit staff, I think we need to make greater use of time-limited work permits. To improve education and skills, we should provide more on-island training, and we need to actually deliver a higher education strategy and ensure fairer support with university living costs. As a former member of a Public Accounts Committee, I recognise the need for the government to reduce debt and refocus spending on the priorities of taxpayers. We need to return to one department, one minister to improve accountability. And to restore your influence over the states, we must bring back senators at the next election. So please consider me for one of your votes on the 22nd of June. Thank you.
Hello, I am Moz Scott, an independent candidate, resident in St Brelade for 20 years, having lived and worked in our island for 30 years. Much as I love my parish and am good with detail, too many crises are happening to offer small. Housing, economy, staffing, supply chain, cost of living, inflation, the list goes on. The change in government needed to address these issues requires more than words, wish lists and grandstanding. My knowledge as a successful Jersey finance lawyer and my voluntary work experience, including for 2 Jersey government committees, has helped me learn how to identify and counter imprudent and unethical government more than other candidates who don't know Jersey law, government process, and how you create meaningful productivity so well. Teachers and healthcare professionals have been overloaded with red tape that obstructs their productivity and recruitment of necessary staff, along with a lack of funding, which a £1 billion hospital building will aggravate rather than solve. Immediately before campaigning, I consulted with people directly involved in delivering vital services across the island to produce the joined-up solutions to improve government culture, services and funding in the form of the propositions on Vote.je. I know how to deliver. For example, our local health and education professionals should be leading in the areas in which they are knowledgeable without red tape blocking the way. Government should focus on acting as a watchdog, providing supporting administration. A lack of funding affects the younger and older across the board, owing to poor government management, including of our economy. We can no longer afford to turn a blind eye to how former states members, led poorly by government advisers, have contributed to this. Big words will not pay our future bills or help those who already are struggling with our inflated cost of living, of housing and of care. States members need to lead and protect by asking the right questions, calling out spin, knowing what ethical conduct and good financial management is, while actively pursuing the technical changes needed to improve funding for the economy and delivery of government services, while minimising the impact on the taxpayer. For your vote to produce better results and better value, please vote for me. Thank you.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Steve Pallas. I was born and educated in the island and have lived in St Brelade for 20 years. I've been married to Anne for 40 years. I've 3 children and 2 granddaughters. I ran several businesses prior to being elected to the States in 2011. I've served 2 terms as your connotab and more recently as a senator. Islanders are understanding to their cost that the quality of healthcare they are accustomed to has deteriorated in recent years, and access to their GP is taking longer. Don't believe me? then what about Dr. Salman Zaman, our consultant for radiology, who said in the JEP last week that over the past 2 years, things have precipitously deteriorated, waiting lists for procedures and care are rising rapidly, and GP staff are under immense pressure from increasing workload, compounded by staff shortages. This can't go on. We must have a health service that is affordable, accessible, and meets islanders' needs. The Health Insurance Fund has been misused by ministers. £58 million of your money has been used trying to implement a flawed Jersey care model. The subsidy to GP practice has been frozen for over a decade at £20. It's unsustainable for GPs and putting off islanders going for treatment. For a young family or pensioner, £50 plus is simply too much, and is set to rise further. We will bring the subsidy to GPs back to at least the 2012 level by using the fund in the way it was intended. Failure to act now will result in more islanders suffering severe illness or disease that is preventable. There is a crisis looming in GP practice through vacancies, retirements, and high living and housing costs. It needs attention now if primary care is not to collapse. Morale is low in the hospital. We have dedicated staff who have great pride in their work, but they're being let down by senior management who are uncommunicative and don't listen. Is this the way to treat a workforce that have supported us all through COVID? Some staff I've spoken to live in a climate of fear, feeling victimised for speaking out. It also cannot be right that a senior clinician with over 20 years' service is marched out of the hospital without due process or evidence of wrongdoing. The suspension and neutral act if it destroys a person's reputation. Bullying and harassment must stop so that staff feel protected and valued. The debacle of Samurai Ward Rehabilitation Unit highlighted how care was devolved into the community too quickly and at significant cost to patients, both in human and financial terms. High occupancy across the island's mental health wards are due in part to a lack of onward care in the community. When will senior management finally realise that the basis for the Jersey care model, care in the community, is simply not working? Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Steve Bailey. I'm standing with the Progress Party as a Deputy of St Brelade. I've lived in Jersey for 25 years and in the heart of St Albans for 22. In 1997, I came to the island and took up the post of Jersey Director with Condor Ferries. In 2013, I became the NatWest Island Games Director and delivered the biggest games to date, on time and under budget. Since then, I have worked for the Ports of Jersey and the Jersey Oyster Company in senior management roles, and I'm currently a trustee on the St Helier Youth Community Trust. I have a proven track record and will not fail to continue this success if elected as one of your deputies. I believe in party politics. I have always been a collaborative team player in my professional life. I firmly believe that a party made up of like-minded people can bring about change more effectively than individuals fighting their own corners. We live in a beautiful parish, and I will work hard to keep it so. The Kennervay precinct needs attention. I believe an upgrade to its building and facilities are necessary. I would also like to see further cycle and walking routes developed in the parish. I will work hard to ensure that urban development is only undertaken in St Brelade when it benefits us as a community. That said, I agree there is a housing crisis. Government must work with other outside agencies in a collaborative way if we are to improve this urgent situation. We must make politics honest and decent again. I believe in fairness for all. Government must be transparent, accountable from the top down. The new government must listen to the electorate. It has not done that for many years. I would support the introduction of the living wage for all low-paid staff. This may have to be achieved in stages, but it is a pledge that my party makes. Education is a high priority. There should be no barriers preventing an individual accessing high-quality education at any level or any age. We must prioritise how we fund and develop the health service, ensuring it is fit for purpose in the future. Government must become more supportive of all its frontline staff. They are indeed valuable assets. I believe that government should always practice financial prudence and always look to achieve the best economic and social outcomes for the island. I am a keen supporter of the proposal to introduce a marine park. We must protect the seas that surround us. Global warming is a threat. We will all have to share responsibility for the difficult decisions we will have to make if we are to achieve our global warming pledges. I commend our full manifesto to you.
Good evening. I'm Carl Bush and I'm standing as an independent candidate for St Brelade. Isn't it wonderful that sometimes when you get lost you stumble across a beautiful part of the island that you've never seen before? However, before you got there, you had the annoyance and the frustration of not getting to where you originally intended. This has been my experience in reskilling, learning something new, something I didn't know I was going to learn. It's just the journey that got me there. It's been a struggle, but I am now a better person for the experience. I'm a social entrepreneur, and my business focuses on helping the community. Social entrepreneurs are explorers. They get lost. They find the things that work, but actually, just as importantly, they find the things that don't work. They need to be agile, they learn from experience and plot a course. Social entrepreneurs address the major issues we are facing in the world today. Housing crisis, population, skills, environment, aging, and to me, the number one, health, and social inclusion, especially as we age. It is important to remember that the problems we face are also worldwide. And in finding the answers to our problems, we should be sharing our solutions with the world community as they do with us. We vote in politicians to deal with the issues and to find the answers, and who often then get bogged down in bureaucracy. The fact is that we may well have the answers ourselves. We need government, of course we do, but community also possesses ideas, vision, and know-how. We have it in this room. We have it in St Brelade. And we have it in Jersey. We need to enable this, and through social enterprise, we can support people who want to have a go. We need government to build the framework for social enterprise to fully function in its own right, and not just be a bolt-on to charity, where individuals can run their own community interest businesses, receive government support, charitable funding, and support the worldwide community. This is what I'll do for you.
Good evening, everybody. It's really good to be in this new Le Kennebec school. I was a Le Kennebec student myself, but not here, of course, in the old school, and I'm very envious of the new facility they've got here. I'm Monty Tadier, I'm a member of Reform Jersey, and I'm your sitting deputy for this district. I've got the strange privilege, in one sense, of being the youngest candidate here, but also the most experienced with 14 years in the States. I don't take anything for granted, though, and it's been a real experience going around seeing so many people
in this new bigger district, which I really welcome for the first time in a long time. We can be now one parish again, electing 4 deputies for the future. Now, we've heard a lot from the candidates about what's bad in the island, and that's understandable. There is a lot of frustration out there. When I go around on the doorsteps, I'm hearing it more than ever. There have always been times in the past, of course, where people say, we want change, and this is the election where we're going to get changed, and then nothing really seems to happen. I think this is a different election because we've got a different system in place. We don't really know how it's going to work out, but we've got some real opportunities here for the first time to stop electing people based on personality and this culture of the personality that's existed in the past. And how many times, myself included, have we thought, yes, I'm going to vote for that senator, for example, and I'll put all my faith in that person to realise that on his own, on her own, she cannot do it. You need to be part of a team that's going to have an effective way of delivering change. And that does mean party politics in the island. It doesn't mean the kind of party politics we see in the UK, where it's bipartisan and they're always saying the other side is wrong. It's about actually having a collaborative approach, working with independent candidates who are like-minded, who've got a vision for the island. And so let's take us from a position where we all agree that there is definitely some things that need to change in the island. Very quickly, I'm going to focus on 3 of those. We're going to look at health, housing, and I call it heritage, but by that I really mean community. And I hope to develop some of those points later. Health is the great leveller, isn't it? And going around, we know that is something that affects us from old to young. We need to make sure we have a good health system in place, but increasingly it's unaffordable, waiting lists are now out of control, and we really need to get to grips with that. I'm not going to talk about the new hospital because that's a separate issue. I'm more concerned about what goes into the new hospital, what kind of service it provides, and that takes me on to housing, because housing is no longer an issue which just affects lower middle class people or lower middle earners, I should say. It's an issue that is affecting the whole island, including hospitality now. And so when we talk about a living wage, it almost becomes abstract. If we have a living wage but we don't have living pensions and living rents, then what do? The bell's about to go. So I'll finish on culture and community. The good thing we have in Jersey is still a sense of community, but we need to take our island back, put it back to where it should be, and then we need to all do that collectively, working collaboratively. Thank you.
Good evening. I'm James Corbett. I'm the Jersey Alliance candidate. I'm a Queen's Counsel. That's a fancy lawyer. Someone's got to be. I got the bullet. And I've worked most of my life in small islands, some of them hotter, some of them colder, and all of them with financial services at the centre of their economy. Let me ask you a basic question. What sort of Jersey do you want to live in? Because that's what this election is about, and the constables and the deputies you return at this election will answer the question for you. I'm not going to talk details. I want to give you mine and my party's vision of what we want to deliver over the next 4 years. A Jersey that's vibrant, economically successful, has a fair community, at peace with itself, and not tearing itself apart, and committed to producing the best quality of life for its residents that anyone can. A place that we're all proud to call home. Now, I'm not much of a fan of government. I'd mostly rather it just got out of the way and let people get on with their own ambitions to the extent that their talent will carry them. But that only works if there's a genuine equality of opportunity for everybody here. And that's where government does have a role. And its role is to produce, I believe, the best education that it can, the best health services that it can, houses people can afford to live in, and the cleanest and most beautiful environment that it's capable of delivering. And there are no quick fixes to get to that. The solutions have to be solid, and they'll be long-term, and the people you elect are committed to that longer term. Now, I'm proud to be standing in St Brelade. I wasn't born in Jersey. That would have been a happy accident, but it would have been an accident. I'm here by choice. And when I hear from some of my brothers and sisters here how awful Jersey has become, I don't recognise that. If it's that bad, why don't we all leave and the last one can turn out the lights? Well, that's not what I'm committed to delivering. I hope we'll get some of the details tonight of what people are standing on. And when we have, I hope that you will trust me with one of your 4 votes next week. Thank you.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name's Jonathan Renner. A few short words about me first. I grew up in the parish. I went to Lemoyne, Kennevay and Holyoke, and then I went away and had a 30-year career at the BBC, making television programmes. And then 3 years ago, I came back to the island. And in fact, my eldest son now goes to this school, and my other son is about to join him in September. So that's me, but what do I think? Well, in this election, you're being asked to choose deputies who will represent you both at a parish level, but also deal with island-wide issues. And I think in St Brelade that's made easier because, in a way, this parish is a microcosm of the whole island. You know, we have all the beauty, but we also have all the challenges. We spend millions on consultants, but we can't find the funds to revamp the elephant park for our children. We build luxury high-rises on the waterfront, but drag our feet on protecting St Brelade's Bay. We can afford an £800 million hospital, but a quarter of the island live in poverty. Ladies and gentlemen, I agree with what you've been telling me on the doorstep. Jersey has lost its way. I believe we need new, serious-minded politicians who will reconnect the State's Assembly with the people of Jersey, to renew the ties that bind us. We need deputies who value accountability, honesty, and transparency. And we need clear thinking. For example, on housing, develop brownfield sites, end mortgage tax relief on buy-to-let, introduce an empty property tax, and expand the shared equity housing scheme. On the environment, protect our amazing natural heritage and embrace the opportunities offered by the journey to net zero. On staff shortages, instead of putting all our efforts into attracting wealthy, high-value residents to the island, let's put the same amount of effort into attracting the real high-value residents we need today. The nurses, the teachers, the hospitality workers, the social workers. And on the way we're governed, undo the changes made by Mr. Parker and give us back a simple system in which every minister has a chief officer who answers to them. I think this election is a time for renewal, a reset of who we are and what we want to be. I'm an optimist. We're in control of what happens in this island. We write our own laws. We have power. We need to use that power to make this a parish and an island that works for everyone. Thank you.
Is this thing working? So that concludes the speeches from each of the 9 candidates, which means now, ladies and gentlemen, that your turn has come. And it is your opportunity, this is your opportunity at this Hustings to ask the questions of importance to you. If you remember, the questions will be answered by the candidates in order. The first answer will be given by candidate number 2. So if you would like to ask a question, may I ask you please to raise your hand so I can see what level of demand there is. Quite encouraging. So I'll start with the first off the starting block, who is the lady with the aqua jacket.
Thank you very much. I would like to ask each one of you, what are you going to do about the environment? What is happening in Jersey. I don't need it.
We do have a roving mic, which I forgot to use. My apologies. I'll ask you to put your question again using the roving microphone.
Hello, my name is Irene and I am very concerned of what's happening on the island in the environment. What is happening? Why are we not preserving certain areas, the sea? Why are we not looking after the soil, respecting the farming community? It's just a few questions, so I'll leave it at that. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Does that sound like it's on for everybody? Yeah. Okay. Thank you for the question, or should I say the series of questions there rolled up into one. I think we all know that the consensus within the scientific community. Is the microphone on? Can you hear me now? Yes. Sorry about that. Consensus within the scientific community is that our climate is changing due to human activity. And as a wealthy and developed jurisdiction, Jersey has, I think, a moral responsibility to contribute to the betterment of our environment and to cut emissions as far as possible. But I think we have to do this sensibly. We have to take sensible steps. I think we need to do it through evolution rather than revolution. And my ideas around that would be improving our transport alternatives. I'd be looking at improving cycling and walking routes. I'd be looking at promoting electric travel. I'd also be looking at a complete ban on oil and gas-fired boilers when they come to the end of their natural use. So for me, it would be about promoting electrical energy. You talked about a marine park as well, did you as well? I think I would have voted in favour of the marine park. Certainly, the sea is one of our prized assets.
Hello. I asked exactly the same question 8 years ago. I saw this really horrible building on St Brelade's Bay and thought, what are they doing? How on earth are they being allowed to do this? And I'm a Jersey lawyer, or certainly was. So, I started looking around, I started asking. I ended up chairing a parish working party appointed by the man on my left. And we found that we were saying to government, this is not working well. And we were told, you've got to wait every 10 years. That's when we reviewed the planning policy. I went through the procedure, and I think it's farcical. So I have actually suggested that we should be moving towards a code, not a kind of planning system that just gives permission to build and build and build and is weighted that way. I've done some work with the tree strategy that's starting to help, but we need to do some more work there. We actually need to get trees replanted if they're taken down. That would be a really good measure. Climate change, well, I agree with Helen. Is that? Okay, I'm out here. Thank you very much anyway.
Thank you. I'll answer. Can you hear me? Okay. From both the parish and from an island point of view. From an island point of view, I want to pick up a couple of issues. One is sustainable transport. As much as it might be uncomfortable for some people to think about not using their car so much, we are going to have to, as an island, change our culture when it comes to car use and the use of fossil fuels. We're being forced into it at the moment by the cost of fuel. But I think from an individual point of view, we are going to have to seriously consider how we finally get around to dealing with the use of fossil fuels. From a point of view of the parish, as much as Scott on my right probably wanted me to do first, I did actually manage to get the St Brelade's Bay improvement plan into the recent island plan review, and that will protect St Brelade's Bay.
Anyway, Anyway, I'm going to take one of the points of the question that you mentioned, the marine environment. I really do think that we should push ahead and get a marine park. Can you hear now? I feel like a rock star now. Yeah, I'm going to start again. I believe that we have to have a marine park at some stage. We are working towards it where certain areas now are defined as protected areas. But it is perhaps one of our greatest resources, and we have to protect it for future generations as well, not least our fishing industry. Although there is a problem, we know that the fishing industry does have a problem, and we have to stop some of the practices that may actually happen. But we do need work to start on that now. The other thing which I'm very interested in is I do agree that we've got to stop the use of fossil fuels. And perhaps we have to look at the way that we will eventually generate our own electricity. We're currently using generated electricity from France, which, to be honest, is a very good deal for us. But going forward, that may change. We've already been threatened by the French that they'll turn the power off if they don't agree with something we're doing. Perhaps we have to start looking at offshore wind farms. Perhaps we have to look at tidal power and solar power.
It really does break my heart. I'm a keen swimmer, and you swim across the bay, and on a beautiful, pristine, clear morning, and you can see the bottom of the sea, and you can actually see down to about 4 meters, and then you see a plastic bag, and it's awful. Your heart sinks, because you're experiencing nature at its best, and it just sums up as to how serious we're taking this. We're not really taking it seriously, are we? We've got people that are talking about environmental issues, shouting about it, and yet they're having oil boilers installed in their house. So what I'm coming on to say is that the tone has got to come from the top, and okay, I'll finish there.
Let's see how this mic works. To continue from that point, I suppose, I do have some sympathy with what Carl said. So it's a bit like if you go to the doctor and the doctor says, look, you've got liver problems, serious liver problems, and you need to give up drinking, or you've got lung infection, you need to give up smoking. We take that seriously. We listen to the doctor's advice. And we've had people telling us for 40 years that the planet's health is seriously ill, but we collectively need to change our behaviour. What we can't do, though, is just start blaming people for habits that they've got, perhaps through no fault of their own and because of their economic circumstances. So that's why at Reform Jersey we're really keen on something called the just transition. And it means that the changes that are necessary, which we must all get to grips with, can't fall simply on those who can't afford them. So we need to put in viable alternatives for government. And if you look at our manifesto, I haven't put them on the seats, partly to save paper, but you can read about the pledges that we've got that are tangible to do with home heating, insulation, right throughout the board. We can't do it justice in a minute. Thank you.
18%. Right, I'm trying harder. 18% of Jersey's land is natural environment. 52% is farmland. That is more natural land than anywhere but the Sahara Desert. I hope it continues, because it isn't just people that need lungs, it's places that need them too. And the connection between wellness, physical and mental, and open spaces is so well established it's hardly worth arguing about. 95% of Jersey's territory is sea. We are committed at the Alliance to 30% of that 95% being a marine park. It has to be. There are, I think you mentioned, Madam, the question of places of special interest. There are only 51 on the whole island. There could be more, but no one's investigating them. Big question, not much time.
Ivy, thank you very much for the question. I think what I feel most about the environment in Jersey is that it is such a missed opportunity at the moment. You know, we have such an amazing natural beauty in this island, and it feels like it should be at the root of everything we do. When I came back to the island, we just declared that we were going to be net zero, and I was very proud to come back to an island that had made that commitment to be net zero by the time of 2030. But it's all seemed to have stalled a bit since then. So I think the fundamental thing we need to do is to drive the green agenda through so much of the island in terms of the, say, the farming community, in terms of, say, the even the finance industry, where we can use the expertise we have in finance to help fund environmental protection around the world and give the finance industry a new lease of life. Tourism, the same. Wouldn't it be great if we could promote Jersey as an incredibly green, environmentally friendly jurisdiction where people wanted to come and have their holidays? There's so much opportunity.
May I just say before we move on to the next question that that's great bell ringing.
You told me to be ferocious. Try my best.
Thank you for the question, Irene and everybody else who's interested. I'm so passionate about the environment. I started an organisation called Jersey in Transition 12 years ago, in 2010, and a lot of the people I see here tonight were members of that at different times. We did a lot of work that has hopefully laid ground rules for quite a few of us. Now, Irene mentioned the sea, the soil and farms in her question. And yes, we need to protect 30% of our waters. We need to rewild quite a proportion of our land. We can do this by making hedgerows wider and more interesting. But we don't need to do this at the expense of useful farmland, because farming has come a long way since the days when people first started ploughing straight lines and putting crops down them and then weeding around them. With permaculture and regenerative methods, we can grow an awful lot more in a limited space, using compost and what have you.
As I was saying before my error was pointed out, that's great bell ringing, thank you. Rule them with a rod of iron, Joe. Now, could we have the next question, please? There's a gentleman at the back there in a white and a black striped shirt.
Thank you. Are you satisfied with the current system of taxation? And if not, what changes would you actively campaign to introduce?
Well, the short answer is no, for so many reasons. In fact, I was on a panel that looked at the OECD threats quite a few years ago, how to change the tax system. I wasn't actually able to see things to the end, but on the basis of Treasury figures, we ended up with what we got and developed a great big black hole. And there are ways of changing it fundamentally. I mean, 010 isn't really working well. The actual, perhaps we should be looking more at the taxing the way we use our own resources. There's also the question about investment companies that are even owned by local residents, how some of that's escaping, quite a lot of that's escaping the net. So I'm saying let's have a proper review, really get to the middle of this. There's too many anomalies as well. So I'm sorry, there's such a long list, and I was a tax lawyer, so you know, I could be really boring on this, but anyway, that's something of the examples.
In terms of income tax, I think we've been quite clear from a party perspective that we want to stay with the stable structure we currently have. GST, again, we're not in favour of moving away into exemptions. We think the broad rate should stay as it is. There's opportunities if we do want to help those that are less well off to do it through the income support scheme or through an enhanced community cost bonus, living cost bonus or something of that type. In terms of international tax, A lot of people have said, what are we going to do about 0-10? I think rather than us independently trying to change the tax structure, that could have a huge financial damage to our finance industry. I think we need to fast follow what others do. We're only just really getting to grips with pillars 1 and 2 of the new international tax rules. Pillar 1 won't have much of an effect here, but Pillar 2 will have an effect on some 2,000 companies here. So I think we need to assess that, see what extra tax we can gain from that, and then move on. But let's be fast followers.
This is a difficult one because we're both following the same party line. I agree with Steve. We would maintain the current rate of income tax, and we would make sure there was an absence of any taxes on capital gains and inherited wealth. We would maintain the GST at 5%, but enhance the community cost bonus, and review corporate taxation whilst ensuring tax neutrality for international business is maintained. 20% is a fair rate. We don't propose to change it. So in all, I suppose at the moment, we would review, but possibly just keep the same taxation as we've got at this current time.
Well, I think it's pretty good at the moment from my point of view. I mean, let's look at this. No inheritance tax. I mean, crumbs. You don't need to look too far away from here, and jurisdictions are getting absolutely stuffed on that. So we're thankful for that. International, we've got to attract industry. Okay, we've got to attract the finance sector. 20% income tax, fantastic. We've got to make it up somewhere. GST's okay. But let's have a look at this. Tax relief on buy-to-let. Well, I think we've got some leeway there that could possibly be looked at. That's my feeling on the tax plan.
Thank you. I'm going to stand up in case the mic doesn't work. We've got some really interesting policies and exciting ones on tax, even though they're fairly modest in a sense. So the first one is that the 20% tax rate isn't okay. It's inherently unfair, and we can demonstrate this by saying that the vast majority of people in Jersey, probably in this room as well, will be marginal rate taxpayers at 26%. You know it's unfair because every £1,000 that you earn when you're on marginal rate, you pay £260 extra to the taxman or woman. And then if you're on the 20% tax rate, every £1,000 you earn, you only pay an extra £200 to the taxman or woman. Therefore, sorry, we're taking this a bit far, you have to be politically correct these days, and that shows demonstrably it's not a fair system. Now, when it comes to GST, we know it's not fair because if you spend all of your money every month and you have to buy things, you're spending 5% extra income tax effectively. A rich person doesn't spend all of their income, therefore GST is regressive, and that's why we want to take GST off food. It should never have been on food, and for the rest of our policies, have a look in the manifesto.
I'll stand too, and you'll have the long and the short of it when I follow Martin. You asked about the system, not about individual taxes, sir. Broadly speaking, the tax system here is no worse than anybody else's. I said I spent a lot of time on small islands. Most of them don't have direct taxes to speak of. But the point about tax is it's not meant to be ideological. It's the money the country gathers to spend on stuff that people agree on. And if you don't have a control on tax, you don't have a control on spending other people's money. There are other means by which money could be raised. To me, they're more palatable than taxes. And I'm not talking just about me, I'm talking about all islanders. It's what makes Jersey comfortable for so many, even if not everyone. And I'll stop there.
Thank you for the question. I think the fundamental thing I feel about the tax system in Jersey is that it places too big a burden on individual taxpayers, and we have too narrow a tax base. 650 million out of the roughly £1 billion pounds that is raised by taxes comes from individual taxes. That is very high. There are lots of things we can do to change that. I don't favour revolutionary change, but I do think two things need to be pointed out. During COVID, companies took an awful lot of money from the government to survive, and many of those companies do not pay tax. I find that quite hard to justify. And I think also that things like empty property, which I mentioned in my speech, I think we should be looking at taxing things like that, because we need to broaden the tax base and make it so that the burden on individual taxpayers is shifted.
Yes, as Monty said, Reform Jersey has got some great ideas about income tax. It's not fair at the moment that people earning more than 100 or 200,000 a year pay a lower rate of tax than those of us who are earning a more sensible amount of money. The same applies on social security payments. People who are earning more than £250,000 a year have their social security payments that they and their employer make capped. We want to remove that cap. But those two measures of making sure that people who are on large incomes pay their share and making sure people on large incomes pay their share of social security too, it will allow us to take a whole percent off the 26% rate, bringing it down to 25. And that's quite a nice handback for the rest of us. Middle Jersey has been squeezed far too long in order to pander to the very rich and in order to make sure that we can also look after those who struggle.
Thank you. And I think the benefit of going last to answer this question is that everything I would have said has probably been said. But to answer your question, as a married woman, I'm extremely unhappy with our taxation system. It's 2022 and I'm still not allowed to handle my own tax affairs. So that would be the first thing I would say. Our tax system was developed in the 1960s. We've tinkered with it at various stages, largely to protect our finance industry, which is fine, but I agree with other speakers that there is definitely scope for review now to make sure that it's as fair as possible for all islanders. When it comes to 010, it is often criticised, and I can see the frustration with it, but we should keep in mind that it has maintained Jersey's competitiveness as an international finance centre for over 15 years. It has supported jobs in the island, and it's still an internationally approved tax system. If we're talking outside of systems, if we're talking about processes, one of the things I would recommend is that we get a better service from Revenue Jersey. Very few people understand their income tax.
Right, there's a lady sitting at the back on the left with a pink top whose hand went up at the very beginning, so now is your chance, madam. And I think we've got ourselves into a situation where people stand up to ask their question and also give their name.
Okay, my name's Rosie and I'm
The mic's on its way.
Hi, my name's Rosie, and for St Brelade, where do you stand between local hotels being sold for development and tourism for locals and visitors as well?
Thank you. That really is an excellent question. St Brelade seems to have suffered more than most with the loss of some quite key hotels over the last 2 or 3 years. I live by 2 of them. We've lost the Miramar and we've lost the Windmills, both of whom cater for different markets, but nevertheless is a great loss to the island. We have some key sites in St Brelade's Bay Hotel, Lorrisel, Golden Sands. It's absolutely vital that we protect those hotels and they're not lost to the tourism sector. There is a risk with protectionism that you can devalue hotels, and that's an argument that's been put by some of the hotel groups. But nevertheless, what we don't want to see is more of the Bully Bay type debacles we've seen, where hotels have been sold to high net worths and then developed into one single property. So we do need more protection for hotels. The government needs to take responsibility for that. Thank you.
I think with hotels, we've been losing hotels for many years, and that's because of market change off island as well. We must take care of the hotels that we've got here, but in many ways we can't interfere with some of them because they were and have been run and aimed at particular markets. I named a couple. The coach market that used to come in actually used to have a big market in St Brelade. That market doesn't exist anymore. So the government has to help industry, tourism, the Jersey Hotel Association redefine particular markets off island. A lot of the St Brelade hotels as well at one time had a lot of Europeans coming into them. That market's fallen away because of Brexit. Again, government must assist and help the hotel owners with JHA and Jersey Tourism, or Visit Jersey as it is, to re-identify and remarket to it. Because otherwise, hotels should be a valuable asset. They won't be if they don't get visitors.
Yes, well, the Bay, what a beautiful site. We took advantage of the deals, the staycations, and I think we've stayed in most of them in the Bay there. Now, the question is, when hotels are sold for development, the problem is that the soul of in this case the village, and I've seen it around the world and especially in the UK, the soul of it disappears, and this is what we've got to keep a hold on. But the only thing is, after running on from Steve here, is that if there's no business for the hotel, what do you do? It's a very, very difficult situation, but the loss of hotels from the Bay, awful.
Let's try sitting down this time. So, you know the story of the little boy and the emperor's new clothes? And the little boy, it takes a little boy to say, hang on a minute, the emperor's not wearing any clothes, and then everyone starts realising, yeah, that's right. And they start laughing at first, but they get also very, in the Jersey context, you get very angry. You look at Portland, you look at Bully Bay, you look at Greve de Lec. Those things didn't happen by chance. They happened because we had the wrong politicians in there, bending over backwards to speculators, and they let them come in and effectively buy our coastline from under us, sold it to the highest bidder. Now, we can do better than that. Luckily, in St Brelade, the hotel industry is still viable. We've got the most beautiful beach in the island, and Waynay not far from it. And we need to protect it. And I pay tribute, actually, to Moz Scott. She's done some sterling work there in the parish there. She's not somebody who pops up at election time. She's fought hard for that. And it'll be the same with Reform Jersey and with Nigel Jones for the environment. But we do need to start taking these things seriously. And if we ever thought that we needed proof that we've sold our soul too far, and we need to take our island back, we just need to look at those other prime sites.
I am actually standing. When I was a boy, Jersey was known for its cheap hotels and boarding houses, and then the market changed, and it moved away from the cheap hotels to something more luxurious, because that was the understanding of what the market was going to be. But somehow, the island just can't make up its mind which way it's going to go, and it's not surprising hotels go out of business. But what is the development? It's not all gazillionaires coming in, paying 30 million and turning a place into a private yard. We are going, no doubt, this evening to be talking about housing at some point, and most of the current development is changing our hotels into flats and dwellings. And you can't have it both ways in the end. I'd just be satisfied if we could at least address the question. And for the avoidance of any doubt, although I applaud Moz for what she's done, she's not the only one taking it seriously, because we, all of us in this audience, live here.
I think on this one, we all know what we want. The real question is, how do we achieve it? We all want to keep our hotels open and keep a thriving tourist sector. The tools we have are not easily accessible. One thing that's suggested sometimes is we should simply ban conversions of hotels into homes. I don't think that will work. Many hotels are mortgaged on the basis that they could be sold for housing. Their business model would collapse. I think two things we can do very clearly is we can tighten planning controls and actually enforce them, so that when things are zoned for a particular use, that the planning committees respect that. And I think the second thing we can do is boost the tourism industry. We haven't had a tourism strategy for years. We were supposed to get one this year, it hasn't materialised. We need to have a proper debate about the future of tourism. It hasn't been debated in the States, I'm told, for 30 years. That's how we can protect the future of hotels in this island.
Two important points have been made. One of them is that the thing that really rankles us is when the property speculators get what appear to be very fair deals and the rest of us suffer when our hotels are turned into something that are no longer what we want to look at. The other thing that we need to think about, though, is that we're heading into a future where carbon zero for the climate is going to become absolutely the norm. This is only in the next 10 or so years. People are not going to be flying off on jet planes to the Maldives anymore. Jersey needs to be positioning itself right now to be local and nearby for English tourists as well as for French tourists to hop on a boat and in a few hours be somewhere very beautiful. The second point that's been made that I want to reiterate on that score is that we don't seem to have a policy. 1 minute we're looking for the Bucket and Spade Brigade, next minute we're looking for German walkers. We need to settle.
Thank you for the question. There's no doubt that a successful tourism and hospitality industry actually underpins a successful economy, and it was one plank of our economy. I'm not going to reiterate what other people have said this evening, but I am going to slightly disagree with James Corbett when he talks about losing hotels for housing, because we're losing hotels to luxury apartments. We're not losing hotels to build, for example, retirement villages or multi-generational developments. If you look at the windmills in the Miramar, next to that you have one St Brelade, where those apartments are being sold for a very, very high price. So I think we need more protection for hotels. We definitely need more tools in our toolbox so that planning actually have some teeth when it comes to the decisions that are being made about what hotels are being replaced with.
So, unlike farms, unlike restaurants, hotels don't need planning permission to change their use. And I drafted a proposition to change this. We had an opportunity to, earlier this year. Michael Jackson very kindly brought the proposition. One states member on this desk supported it and one didn't, which was very disappointing because there were consultants actually who were employed at public funds who actually said this exemption needs to be changed, not just to protect St Brelade's Bay, but also the economy. Don't believe the waffle. Look at the people who look at the technical detail and actually try to do the work, please. And I'm sorry, another 10 years maybe.
May I ask for hands up for another? Yes. My contact lenses need an upgrade. I realise there's Michel Bourgeat who's bringing the mic around. So, Michel, if you could be so kind.
I'm Caroline Hathaway. What are the candidates' views on the proposal in the island plan to develop Kennervay as the island's second town?
Thank you for the Can you hear me? Yep. Thank you for the question. I certainly don't want to see St Brelade or Kennervay become the second town for the island. It's most probably a case that a lot of these things we'll have to share out where new development go to, and we'll have to identify the right places for them to go to. I would much rather see any development that does come into St Brelade be actually targeted for the residents of the parish. But for it to become an outlying major town, it is already one of the biggest. I don't think we can just accept that, and I think we would have to review any plans that are put forward for it. But as I've said, any development must be for the people of St Brelade.
No, I for one wouldn't like to see it. How I see Kennervay, I see Kennervay as a place for sport, a place for community, and that's where I have based my community interest business, because I can foresee that that can be the foundation to grow the my social entrepreneurial business and support the local community to develop their own interests in how they want to help the community and the island. And I think it's got this fantastic foundation over there. The sports facilities are fantastic. Actually, the community facilities are fantastic. It just needs all updating.
When I saw that the Bridging Island plan was suggesting St Brelade, Freudians lived there because they wanted to make it into another St Helier, the alarm bells clearly rang. So the first thing I did was put an amendment into that. They had a suggestion that there should be higher densities, a presumption of higher density in the Kennervay. Can you imagine that? Because the Kennervay is already so densely populated, and the people are living on top of themselves, including with car parking. A shortage. I put an amendment into that, and I was only partly successful to that, but in getting a master plan for the area, and that's exactly what we need. The other thing that was strange, they wanted to make St Brelade a second town, but they had a fund which could be used only for St Helier. So I did put an amendment into that, which was successful, which meant it can now be used for Kennervay for Mofor, for example. And lastly, I don't agree with people who have suggested that we should knock down the precinct, because that's people's livelihoods and homes that we're talking about. But what we can do is invest in that area and use some of that central funding to make it a better place.
The Kennervay was selected as a second town. It was partially successful. It's, in commercial terms at least, probably dying on its feet. That teaches us a lesson. You can't just graft a town onto nothing. It has to have a rationale which is workable if it's going to succeed for its citizens and develop the mixed community of residents and business that it needs to sustain itself. I fear that when we speak about what you've just said, that we're forcing the issue and not looking to see what is sustainable. I think we should research further. That's it.
Thank you, Caroline. I think the truth is none of us, if we'd have been polled before this decision was taken, would have said, yay, let's have a second town at Kennervay. The reason we're there is because we have so much pressure on land in the island, and people are looking to how we can most efficiently use it. Now, you can be oppose it if you like, but I guess because I'm an optimist, I think let's take the opportunity that this designation offers. It does mean that we can argue for more funds. After all, a town has a town centre. A town centre should be somewhere where people want to come, shouldn't it? So we can use this designation to try and generate more investment, to try and improve the facilities we've got, to try and improve the infrastructure we've got, and improve the buildings we've got, and make Kennervay a better place. That's the best thing I think we can do with this designation.
This idea of a second town is so important to me that I used a big chunk of my opening speech to talk about it too. If we are going to talk about it, we need to first of all establish we're not talking about making it into a dormitory town. At the moment, there's been a development ethos in St Brelade which has built huge housing estates with very little in them apart from houses. And I mentioned in my opening speech, we need the right balance of houses and shops, of entertainment and workplaces. We don't want everybody to get up in the morning and the first thing they have to do is get in a car and drive 6 miles to where all the jobs are. So we need to make sure there are jobs in St Brelade, and we need to make sure there are shops and that there are services and that there's fun to be had and that there's entertainment. Once we are talking in those terms, then we're talking about a town that I'd be very happy to live in. I suggested in my opening speech, and I reiterate it now, that what we need to do is have a big conversation about this. We need a master plan, and we need to all work on it together.
Thank you, and thank you for the question. I don't support Kennervay as a second town. I don't even think we've got the amenities of a village as it stands at the moment. I think we need to have a parish-wide community conversation about what we want to see go into the master plan around Kennervay, and I think we have to develop whatever we do very slowly and very carefully.
Unfortunately, it's too late to stop that. There are 2 people on this table who tried to stop it by going to the examination in public. I'm one of them. Monty would have gone, but wasn't able, so I basically read out his bit for him. And unfortunately, you have to do what we did with St Brelade's Bay now, which actually is really understand the technical detail of the Bridging Island Plan and fight every application that you don't like on the basis of that policy. And it is hard work, and I really wish we didn't have to do that, but that's how it is. It got approved by the State's Assembly. There may be an opportunity to get a review when they are supposedly had a bit on in 4 years. I certainly will be trying to shove in everything else that I can, including to carry on some of the work to protect the hotels, because I had done some research that said there wasn't going to be hardship, possibly in one, but they should have been put to evidence. So anyway, I will do my best to help.
Nobody I've spoken to either wants or needs a second town at Kennervay. The town itself, I think, is struggling with retail, and I don't think we need to make that worse by having a second town here. Kennervay's overdeveloped. You've only got to go knocking doors in Kennervay to realise that some of the problems that exist. Parking is a non-stop problem in those estates already, so we don't want to make that worse. I'd rather look at it in a way that there's opportunities to improve with the master plan. We've got to look at a new sports centre. I really want that to be a community centre once that's built and be the hub of Kennervay. With opportunity with the old school site, I think that needs to be parish-led sheltered housing and not intense, affordable first-time buyer housing. And I think the one area that really concerns me is the area between the school, which is fantastic, it's great to be here, and the airport. It's the only bit of green left along this road, and we have to protect it. I don't want to see any more building along this road.
Right, next question, please. Gentleman at the back with the checked shirt. Michelle is on his way.
Get your steps in.
Thank you. Glenn Mitchell, can you hear me? Can you hear me? Hello? Glenn Mitchell is my name. To keep Jersey regenerating, do you believe senior civil servants across government departments should reapply for their jobs as you have to do?
Well, I suppose the immediate question is over what term? Is it, I don't know, 3-4 years? I think that in my heart, I would say that within a certain period of time, exactly what that period of time is open to debate. We're all living in times where we are responsible for our work, and I actually found out for the first time that, to my amazement, that civil servants are on a final salary pension scheme, which, from my experience, is a gold-plated pension scheme that really hardly exists nowadays because it's linked to your final salary.
The short answer is yes, and I'll explain why I think that. The first is that we changed government. What's the point in having elections if you can't actually change the people who are really making the decisions, which are the unelected civil servants? The ministers need to be accountable to the public, and the civil servants need to be accountable to the ministers. And that doesn't mean that all civil servants, and I'm looking at 1 or 2 worried faces at the back, are going to have to apply for their jobs every 4 years. It means that the head of each department, you need to make sure that when a new government comes in, you might have like an alliance government, you might have a reform government, you might have a Christina Moore coalition-led government who can't work with certain civil servants. Imagine Charlie Parker's still here, a new government comes in, any government should be able to say, right mate, you've got to go now because you've had your 4 years, and if you're good enough, we'll renew your contract. If we don't want you, we'll get someone else who can fulfil the policies that we were elected on because we've got a mandate to do the job. I think that's simple, isn't it?
I can see that what Monty has just said may be popular, but it doesn't make it right. The reason why there's a permanent civil service is because it was meant to be a receptacle for experience when politicians came and went. That hasn't changed. It was meant to be a centre for integrity and reliability. Arguably that has. So I don't think we want to give up on the idea of a permanent civil service and a revolving door when we happen to feel like getting rid of someone we don't think we can agree with. That does not mean that there shouldn't be periodic requirements for reappointment, as long as it doesn't become the case that you get appointed for 5 years and you spend 4 of those years looking for your next job.
I understand the sentiment behind that question, but I think we need to look at what's driving that sentiment. And I think what's behind the question, if I can dare to put some thoughts into your mind, is that we feel frustrated that the civil service sometimes appears to be blocking, and we sometimes feel frustrated that the civil service is over-managed and there's no clear lines of responsibility. I'm not convinced that the way to deal with that is to make civil servants reapply for their jobs. I think what we need to do is to solve those actual problems. We do, I think, have in some areas too overmanaged. I'm thinking particularly in areas of the health department, which I've heard many people say to me, we have too much complex management. But I think the way to solve this is, first of all, to deal with those particular areas, but secondly, to have clear lines of responsibility and accountability so that everybody knows what their responsibilities is, what they're supposed to be delivering, and they are accountable for those actions. I think a civil service organised on that basis would work.
Yes, I think the problem isn't that civil servants are in their job for too long. It's that they're not very clear what their job is. And it seems to me very simple that the departments that the civil servants run and administer are there to do the bidding of the current government. The government is elected on a range of policies, and the minister should be able to instruct their civil servants as to exactly how those policies, or what those policies should be, and then the civil servants will discuss with them how they should be implemented. We do have a situation here where the civil servants have risen themselves up to a state of grandeur where they cannot be told and will not be told, and they will block everything. And then they will advise their minister that they're blocking it for very good reasons. It's just that they haven't got time to explain what they are right now. That's where the problem is. I think that if we put the cart back behind the horse and have the elected government set the policies and the civil service implemented, then we'd be getting somewhere.
Thank you. I think I'm uniquely qualified to answer this question, having spent over 31 years in the civil service, and I have to say, never having had to reapply for my job. And the first thing that I would say is that the vast majority of civil servants are very dedicated, hard-working people who only have the interests of our community at their heart. That said, in recent years, I think it's clear that there has been a shift in powerful ministers to civil servants, and that has to be reversed. The first step is to return to a one minister, one department, one chief officer model, so that it is absolutely clear who is the responsible minister. At the moment, the accountability is blurred, and that is not acceptable. Most civil servants understand the role. I certainly was very clear about my role when I was policy director, for example, to the Home Affairs Minister. Ministers work, the civil servants work for ministers, not the other way round.
I have a friend who works in the NHS, Glyn, who's had to reapply for her job 4 times so far, and I do think it is quite a kind of stressful thing to put people through. It shouldn't be necessary, because actually, if contracts are properly drafted and have performance standards and you have proper performance reviews, and the actual contract's linked to performance, then in fact you have got the ability to say to people, you're not cutting the mustard, you really should be going. And this is something that actually in the proposition list I've discussed is one of the things. Let's get professional drafting of senior managers' contracts outsourced to the private sector, along with HR management. Let's actually get more of the private sector actually taking over here, because the culture is not being sold by people who don't know what the good is. So let's bring good into the public sector by having more of these partnerships where we can compensate for the lack of training and the slippage in terms of standards.
You can't compare civil servants to politicians. They're covered by employment legislation. We're not. They have a right to security within their roles. They've got children, like many of you, so the simple answer to that question is, no, I don't think they should apply. Civil servants should be impartial. And I've got to say, within my experience, all the civil servants I've ever worked with have been impartial. We've allowed the current system to be developed. It does need change. The structure, the current government structure brought in by the former chief executive is wrong, and it's not working. And I do agree that we do need to have a chief officer for every minister. But one of the issues we need to deal with the most urgently is the roles and the functions of the chief executive officer. Currently, the chief executive officer has too many powers. They are chief principal accounting officer, and they can stop anything financial. That has to stop. Those decisions need to be in the hands of ministers.
Yeah, I think in actual fact it was the OneGov programme that was brought in that really started to bring a bad note. Civil servants generally are well-trained, good people who work very hard. But latterly, we've seen too many extra senior civil servants being employed. They're one of the entities on this island that make no money, but they spend an awful lot on salary, and it's increased. I don't think it's right at all that someone should have to stand for a re-interview after 4 years. Performance is gauged by the people they work to. That would be the minister or the chief officer. You know, they have children, as Steve said, they have mortgages. That's no way to try and keep people here of top quality. No, I don't agree with it, and I think that, we can actually get a much better system.
Next question, please. Lady in the front row with the diamante embellishments.
You're going to enjoy this. Good evening, everybody. My name is Jo Mitchell. I'm an ex-Treasury civil service, and I am on a pension. And may I remind you that I pay double tax because I pay tax on my gross pension or my gross income, and I also pay tax on my pensionable income. Thank you. I have a simple question to ask you. In the old days, when I worked, you could open up the telephone directory. You knew where education was, you knew where harbours was in the directory, you knew where the state's offices were, you knew where all departments were. And it annoys me now that I have to go through a ruddy telephone directory trying to find who I want to talk to instead of being able to simply see it in the phone book under the department name. Would you, if you are elected, kindly consider this point, please?
Is that me? Doesn't really need an answer, Joan. Thank you. I think I'll respond to it, though. I think, on the one hand, we've had politicians for years telling us that we don't want a silo mentality, and that's what they sold the new system to us, where every minister is kind of got a blurring of responsibilities. I think there is a new way that's halfway in between. I think government needs to be able to respond to needs. They need to be able to work as a cross-party potentially, but also cross-ministerially as corporate parents, for example. We know that housing issues will have things that affect social security, income support, environment, planning, and all that kind of thing. But ultimately, we need the buck to stop somewhere, and that's the problem that we've got at the moment. So absolutely, you should be able to open the phone book and know who to speak to about what particular issues. And that's why I think the local deputy is going to be so important. There's been a lot, quite rightly, of feeling about losing senators, but you will now have accountable members in your parish, in our parish, and throughout the island, where we can phone up people, and they should be the ones to take our issues forward.
Temptress. I'd love to be able to say I agree with every word of that. I think we'll find you or not. Stop flirting. I'll speak to you afterwards. As I say, you tempt me sorely, really. I mean, the fact that you can't ever find anybody to answer your questions, and you get into one of those ghastly cascades, is the bane of life. You should be able to find it simpler than that, but I'm a lawyer, so I'll give you a lawyer's answer. Data protection and privacy. And those are values that were hard fought for, and I think we have to recognise that it's going to make our lives a bit more miserable than they were, but also provide some needed protection for others. But I'm still with you.
May I say, you don't need data protection to name a department in the directory.
I think the underlying feeling, I think, lying behind this is that government has become harder to deal with. It's become harder to find who you need to speak to, and it's become harder to access them. And I think I've experienced this with helping elderly people to try and navigate phone menu systems, which are really difficult. And I don't think that is the way we need to go. We need to go back to a system where you can have drop-in officers, where you can meet with people from the government, talk to the right person, or find the right person through talking to somebody face to face. That is a simple solution to this issue, and I would also pick up Helen's point that we could do this in St Brelade as well. We should have an easily accessible government where you can talk to real people to find out who the right person is that you need to speak to.
We have a whole section in the Reform Jersey manifesto on government accountability. It's something that we take very seriously, and it does need to be improved. In my last answer, I touched on the fact that we need to get the cart and the horse in the right order when it comes to ministers elected and civil servants unelected. But we also need to stop this idea that we need to cut everything in the civil service. There's been civil service cuts and cost-saving measures for a very long time. It means there's nobody left there who actually even knows what the problem is that you're trying to ask about. It's the computer who's the only one who actually knows. We need to get real people back in real seats, and we need to introduce one of the main things which is in our manifesto, which is a public services ombudsman. Somebody that you can actually complain to, who can take action, who does have power. With a public services ombudsman, then there will be a direct route for anybody who's got a complaint.
Thank you. Thank you, Joe. That is a great question. It seems to me that customer service went out the window quite a long time ago with the States of Jersey. Anybody who's tried to go to Philip Lefevre House recently, or anybody who's tried to get in touch with Revenue Jersey, people know that it's extremely difficult. If you do get anybody to answer the phone at all, you certainly can't make an appointment to see anybody very soon. What I would say is that we need to get back to traditional methods of communication so that everybody can communicate with the public. As I said in my opening speech, I think we need a community hub in St Brelade, not just for customer and local services, but also if you need to go for a social work appointment or if you need to have a CAMS appointment, so that you don't have to traipse into town. And again, I reiterate, we need to go through a real front door to speak to a real person about the real issues that matter to us. And the States of Jersey have to take that on board.
Joe, I totally agree with you. I often do try and find who in government is dealing with what, so I can ask them awkward questions. And it's like hunt the thimble. It changed after Charlie Parker came. There was a time I could go online, see who all the people were in planning department. I might have been lucky sometimes if some of them would call me back, but at least I had names. And this is not acceptable to me because it's basically reducing transparency even more. For me, being a States member, you've got to kind of learn to deal with two things, and that's smoke screens and hurdles. Somebody mentioned corners, boxing rings. No, it's actually smoke screens, busting the fluff, and actually removing those hurdles that mean you cannot connect with government. And that is an example too. What, Broad Street, here we're going to have everybody come through our front door. Oh, sorry, it's closed. No, we've got to open that again for the benefit of everyone.
I agree. I think the civil service structure is utterly too complex now. We've had consistently changing titles, so you don't know which department you're dealing with. We've had TTS, GHE, IG. My head's spinning. I don't know what the department's called at the moment. It's difficult to engage with senior politicians. They've hidden for the last 4 years, and that's got to stop. They've got to be accountable, and they've got to answer you. They should be talking to you and prepared to engage. It's difficult to get face-to-face meetings with States officers. I know COVID's been difficult, and I know people have wanted to feel safe, but we've moved more towards working from home. But I'm sorry, we need States officers back in their workplace dealing with the public on a day-to-day basis. Otherwise, we're never going to get back to that normality, and you'll never get answers to your questions.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more, Steve. And we all know it's a problem, and COVID did come along, and it almost enabled what was happening before to be totally entrenched into the psyche. It was bad enough before COVID, but then it's become almost impossible now, as you rightly say, to contact people. Everything we do now is getting more and more difficult. We can fill a tax form out online. We send it off, and then 14 days later or whatever, if we're lucky, we get it back on paper. And from there on in, if there's a query, you've got to chase it down by phone call, instead of them coming back and you can have conversation, even on a computer. So it is very, very difficult. I think that government as a whole has got to become open, it's got to be honest, and it's got to become accountable to everybody. And everybody else has covered the things, but I think what we need to do is ensure that if we make a call, we can talk to someone. Even if we don't get the answer then, they come back to us.
Yes, I think Steve touched on this. This is probably what you don't want to hear, but how many times have we been told you can go online? it doesn't help a lot of us, because what's happening is that the digital world is developing so fast that even myself, who has qualifications in financial technology, I go to the Jersey Digital Hub, and the speak that they talk about, it just goes right over my head at my age. So what I'm coming on to say is that this situation is going to get worse, because we're going to get more and more distant from technology as the population gets older and older. And the way that we get around that is that we need to engage with the community in keeping them in touch with that.
Next question, please. Gentleman with the maroon polo shirt. Michelle's on his way.
You need to go over that side as well.
Okay. Philip LeMaitre. With the recent closure of Woodside Farms and the fact that no farm is taking over the growing of this produce they grew, this highlights that the fact or to grow produce for the local island market is extremely challenging. Do you believe it's important that local food is grown on this island? If so, what will you do to ensure that we as Jersey farmers can produce food that is a similar cost to food that is imported, when considering that imported food, it costs lower to grow it in the countries it comes from, and these countries also receive greater subsidies? It's extremely challenging for us to currently do. Thank you.
I'm not a farmer, but many of my family are. Dairy herds, some arable, and I've watched the life slip out of them as the markets slipped away from them. I think you make a very fair point. If farmers are custodians of the land and its protection, then some slack has to be cut. And since 52% of Jersey is cultivated land, it's a lot of land that's being protected. Do I believe in locally sourced food? The answer is whenever possible. You make the point about competition with cheap imported food. Cheap food policies, whilst understandable, have been part of the problem. Good food is what matters to health as well as more general nutrition. I'm willing to speak to any farmer on the island, and I appreciate that's a falling number, to try and resolve the difficulties you're describing.
Thanks very much for the question, Phil. I mean, this is a very interesting time to be talking about food security, isn't it? And we are very aware of the situation in Ukraine. We're very aware that the things that we took for granted in terms of food and food prices and so on are now no longer quite so certain. I think we have to take a much more holistic view about our farming in the island. We need to think about the resilience of our system. In practical terms, that means we do need to encourage more in the island. We will need to think about how we subsidise it. I think we should do it in terms of encouraging a shift towards regenerative and organic methods of farming. But I think we also need to tackle things like it's hard to get access to the land for people who want to start to get farming. And I think we can get a lot more out of our land by giving more people access to the land so that they can do innovative and clever things with farming. I think there's a lot of energy out there to do that. Things like Scoop and so on have proved that. So I think there's a huge amount we can do, and we must do it.
Yes, we've had it very easy for decades in the sense that what was called the Green Revolution, which was the idea of spraying the fields with strong chemicals, produced massive amounts of production for some decades. The trouble is it's running out of steam now. We've basically sucked as much life out of the farmland as we possibly can, had cheap food for decades, and now we're running into a massive problem which is called biodiversity. With the climate change happening at the same time, we have a big conglomerate of problems coming at us. The answer isn't going to be to produce cheaper food or to even to produce food in anything like the way we're doing at the moment. We need many more people with access to the land, and that includes all kinds of permaculture, regenerative and organic methods being brought into use.
Thank you. I think we're all told that local produce should be a significant part of every Jersey person's diet. We're all told that to reduce our indirect emissions, we should be buying locally and not importing food. We're all told that supermarkets should be encouraged to stock seasonal produce from local producers, etc., etc. And yet we don't seem to be subsidising the farmers in any shape, way or form that is encouraging them to do that, as we've seen with the demise of Woodside Farm. We've given £20 million to a tech fund, which is of course important to our future. We give millions to the finance industry, and I don't think we should be forgetting about our farmers and our growers, especially the way the world is today. If they need our support, I think we have a duty to stand by them.
So I looked at the past rural economic strategy that's since been revised and is no more than a wish list. And the trouble is that the government's trying to be ask too many things from farmers at the same time. Food security, great. Custodians of countryside, great, and I accept that. But almost saying, oh, you should pay your way, you are an industry. I think farming is one of those really big exceptions where we say it's of such value to our environment that actually it should have a very different sort of support. So at the moment, actually, look, it's really the bigger farmers that seem to even get any benefit from claiming subsidies. Loads of the smaller farmers, it's just really not worth it. So I do believe that there needs to be much more of a conversation within the farming community, how we actually improve this, because it's not working in that sense. It's, Charlie was actually saying it's more profitable to grow hemp.
I think we all want to see better food security for Jersey. We know the risks of not having that. Government help for farmers who produce crops for local consumption. If we'd have done that earlier, we might not have lost Woodside Farm. It's clear, though, that without any support, the fact is nobody else has stepped in to pick up the slack that they were growing. So clearly there's an issue. A lot of that's going to be around cost. We all know the price of diesel's gone through the roof, price of fertiliser, plastic, everything to do with producing farm products has gone up. So the only answer to this is, I'm afraid, government are going to have to support the industry more than they currently do. We want to buy local, but it needs to be at a price that's affordable. Supermarkets need to be persuaded and encouraged more to buy locally, but we know that everything to do with their sourcing is all around cost. And we've got to look at the local market and see the value of it.
Yes, of course, government has got to support farmers much more than it's doing. We've used great words like custodians of the countryside and so on, but we must support. Jersey will never produce enough food to support itself, we know that. We will need to import some foodstuffs, but I think we can be a bit clever about what we do. Aquaculture is a way, perhaps, of really turning over food in quantity, salad stuffs and so on and so forth. We've got a problem with egg farmers at the moment. Their food costs, their grain costs and their diesel costs have gone to a point now where even one of the biggest of those producers is struggling. That should not be the case. We should be able to put Jersey eggs on a Jersey stand and sell them as such. But they are under problems. I think we've got to be much more collaborative with the way that we help farmers manage. We are going towards more and more monocrops. We've got to come away from that. Sorry.
Yes, well, aren't we blessed with such beautiful, fresh food, locally produced? We live Well, apparently we're serviced by one of the most expensive shipping lanes in the world. It costs more to ship here than any other area in the world, I'm told by a shipping expert. So really where I'm going on this is that given that and the crisis that we've got into the future with climate change, population growth, the pressure on food is going to be enormous. And what we need to do now is we need to invest in the future. We need to invest in technology. We need to invest in our farming. We need to protect it. No building, and it should be absolutely sacred, the land that we use to produce our food, because that is our security for the future.
It's really sad when you see a farm like Woodside, which that's the one I'm thinking of in Trinity, is that right? Which has been in Jersey, a Jersey family for well over 100 years, facing questions about its continuation. And I've noticed that there has been lots of good practice increasingly from farmers. I've noticed a lot more diversification, crop rotation taking place. And we do need to reward, I think, good behaviour. So we're going to need it increasingly to reduce the island's carbon footprint. This isn't going to be popular, and it's not a party position necessarily. It's my own thoughts, and it's that we far from food being too expensive, I think often food is too cheap. Look at what they've done with Jersey milk. It's actually pegged to what it costs to produce, and it leaves a small margin for the farmers, and it keeps that viable. Okay, that's a tough decision to make, but it means we still have a product which is sustainable in the island. Now, I do want to very quickly link two issues, and I can come back and talk at the end if need be, is that people pay far too much for housing costs, and they don't have enough money left to buy quality food, which is why they're making cuts at the margins.
Next question, please, this time from the left-hand side of the room. Gentleman in the grey shirt.
Thank you. Hopefully it is. Good evening, everyone. Good evening, candidates. Question to you all. How will you deal with the struggling families and pensioners who need help? They need the help as well, don't they? It's good having millionaires on this island, but you have to look after your own as well. Thank you.
Thank you. That's a question that has come up so much on the doorstep, and I am quite surprised that nobody has talked about what is going to happen immediately after this election, because I think we need an emergency budget that will immediately address the cost of living pressures in the island. The government is getting more through tax revenue as a result of inflation. Therefore, there is room to increase tax allowances. There is room, and it should be morally imperative to increase benefits in line with inflation. We should take the other measures we can look at are some of the things I've talked about in terms of abolishing mortgage tax relief and so on, so that for buy-to-let investors and so on, so that we can raise some more money. But I think an emergency budget immediately after the election would be something that would give a clear signal to people that government was taking seriously the pain which everyone is an awful lot of people is feeling at the moment.
Yes, absolutely. We need to look after people who've already given their lives and spent their life at work and are now on their pension. Reform Jersey are very keen that the pensions should always be protected, kept up with line with inflation, and we have dropped well behind at the moment. So yes, there does need to be a step change to bring things back to parity. And from that point on, we have other methods which we are hoping will help not only pensioners but anybody who is suffering a low income, whether it's because of disability or illness or mental health issues or whatever cause. People who are struggling will be helped by the increase in tax that we are planning on taking from those who are earning £200,000–300,000 and more a year, and spending that more wisely on services that benefit all of us, including reducing GST, removing GST from food and reducing it on other essential items.
Thank you. I think your question is around the cost of living. So I think we need to support everybody who is vulnerable. As I said at the last meeting, just because somebody's elderly doesn't necessarily mean that they're vulnerable. But especially as we move into winter, we need to look at the income support top-ups, we need to look at increasing our tax thresholds. And as times get tougher, I think we should explore an option of having a specific GST holiday, not just taking GST off food, but taking GST off everything, delivering a 5% reduction in bills, which would encourage local spending and support businesses across the board. When it comes to food, I think we should be exploring opportunities for cheaper supermarkets and also encouraging the use of food waste saving schemes such as the highly successful Olio, just to relieve the pressure a little bit on people.
I very much agree there needs to be targeted support, and to support that and the funding that we have to address many issues, including where the money's going where it shouldn't. It just going too many directions that I don't think can be justified compared to actually giving some targeted support to people who need it. Fuel costs, government's making a lot of money from the increase of fuel duty right now. And that's one of the areas where I'm actually thinking that kind of like windfall, as it were, could be used more to help people who are actually struggling indeed with their fuel costs, but also to help incentivise landlords to insulate and replace boilers, which again will affect one aspect of cost of living. GST, yes, I think it should come off food. Some supermarkets are arguing that that's a problem for their system. I say, well, at least say the farm shops do, give them the option. If they really can't cope, let them prove it.
We've clearly got problems. I've spoken to people over in the last few days. 2 or 3 pensioners are really making hard decisions about next winter and how they're going to heat their homes. Now, I don't want them to have to make those choices. Some people in the island don't believe we have food banks. We do have food banks, and I'm afraid they are used more and more, and they're going to be used more and more if we don't help those that are less well off. We put forward an alternative to the community care bonus. I'm personally calling it a living cost bonus. It needs to support people that are well above the income support level, and it will be young families, pensioners, that some that will be paying tax. So we've got to get help to people. Reducing fuel duty will help everyone, because most of us use a car, and we've got to try to keep those costs down. But heating fuel is something that we're really going to have to look at getting the duty down on, so that people can afford to heat their homes next winter.
Yeah, helping young families and elderly. It's it goes through the whole ages, doesn't it? We've got to look at tax allowances, how we're going to help people. Steve just mentioned the community care bonus. We've got to perhaps index link some of these payments to make sure they keep up with what is going on. Income support increase. We've got to look at how we're helping these people, especially the younger families. It's wrong on an island like this that people now are relying on food banks. We've just spoken about food and how we actually secure our food that comes in here. We have to take steps to ensure, review it and look and see what we can do.
Yes, financial inequality is a big thing in my manifesto, and I think really there are a few ways of looking at this. One is obviously continuing means testing on benefits so that it's actually delivered right to the source, and distribution of support. Now, running on from that, if you cast your mind back to the height of the pandemic, I think I'm right in saying we led the world with a card, and every man, woman and child got £100. And I would like to see a continuation of that, because that means that the funding goes right to the source. You're not looking at a carpet subsidy on fuel for heating and fuel for your car. If it's delivered to this card, it goes right to the source.
This is the last question, so let me say this, I'll be indulgent, is that I know that a lot of you have come here tonight, clearly you want to vote, some of you have come here with the intention to support a specific candidate or a specific party, but we don't need an emergency budget. What we need at the next election is a budget, hopefully a reform budget, which is going to put pledges in place which really deal with the underlying issues, that start to put people before profit, and that put need before greed in this island, because we've gone too far the other way. We will have coalitions working together, hopefully with independent members, on various issues. And to address the issue of pensioners, it's not right that we've got 34% of pensioners in this island living in relative low income, which is twice as much, is that for me? Which is twice as much as in the UK. And I would like to see actually a living pension as well as a living wage, because we've too often forgotten our pensioners in this island, and it's important that they have spending power as well to live.
This is a serious issue. It's not going to be solved by slogans. You will need to look at the real evidence. In 2021, the revenue taken by the government was £998 million. The bulk of that was actually spent on civil service salaries, but I'm not getting at them. Of that, there is a £59 million surplus over expenditure. And of the expenditure, 109 million went on COVID-related reliefs. So there's 170 million pounds sitting there and in future years available before you start taking money out of other people's pockets. And 170 million is a pretty good chunk of change to resolve these questions. 4 actions. Review all benefits. If they're not doing their job, they need to be increased, and that's what we've got the money to do. Second, the benefits trap. No one should be worse off in work than out. Hike up the price of being a 21E and reduce fuel duty.
Candidate number 7 was correct. That was the last question. So just a couple of words in closing from me. First of all, could I ask you to give a good St Brelade round of applause to Joe and to the church. And finally, this thought: democracy. In Russia, it's a miserable sham, and Alexei Navalny languishes in prison. In Ukraine, they're fighting for it from one street to the other. In Jersey, we got some. So go home this evening safely, and let's count our blessings on that front at least. Thank you very much for coming.